Wednesday, December 6th afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Carla, please call the roll.
Udaley. Fritz.
Here.
Fish.
Here.
Saltzman.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. Carla, could you please read items 1307 through 1310?
1307, adopt the Central City 2035 Plan, Volume 2A, Part 3, Environmental and Scenic, amend the Portland zoning map and Portland zoning codes for environmental overlay zones and scenic resource zones. 1308, adopt the Central City 2035 Plan, amend the comprehensive plan map, transportation system plan, Willamette Greenway plan, Willamette River Greenway inventory, scenic resources protection plan, zoning map and Title 33, repeal and replace prior Central City plans and documents. 1309, adopt the Central City 2035 Plan action charts, performance targets, and urban design diagrams. And 1310, adopt the Central City 2035 Green Plan, Green Loop Concept Report. Sorry.
Colleagues, today is a continuation of the Central City 2035 matter. The Central City will be the first amendment to the new comprehensive plan. As I'm sure you all recall, we've held public hearings and took testimony on Central City 2035 on September 7th, 14th, and 20th. We held deliberation sessions on October 18th and November 29th. All the items that we moved and seconded during those days will be in the amendments report that's going to be a subject of a public hearing here on January 18th. Today we're going to continue to discuss items of interest to council members and decide if we want to move and second additional amendments to include in the amendments report. There will be no public testimony today. And just as a reminder for those of you who are following this process, and I know there's many, the public record is currently closed. That means we are not accepting written testimony at this point either. However, the record will open up again on January 5th in preparation to the January 18th public hearing on the Central City 2035 Amendment Report. And Sally, I assume you'll want to walk us through today's agenda.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor and members of City Council. We've organized the agenda today into two parts, just as we did last time. The first part includes items that staff believes that council should discuss or council has indicated that they would like to discuss. And the second part of the agenda is a package of amendments that we believe are minor or technical amendments that council could move and second as a package. So before we go further, I'm just hoping that council can let us know if there are any items on that list of technical amendments that they'd like to pull for discussion. But there's one other item that we were hoping to pull back into that minor and technical group, and that is parking and loading on Southwest First. That's item N1. We were hoping to include as part of that package.
So, Council, looking at the blue page, are there any of those items that you'd like to discuss or that you're comfortable moving and seconding or are you comfortable just moving and seconding those items as a group?
Give me 1 sec, Mayor.
Yeah, it's right before the fold, there's a blue sheet. And it's listed as amendments and discussion items, and the exception being, of course, N1 has been moved down to the minor and technical amendments.
And that's N1 you wanted to move into that, is that correct?
Yes, please.
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Me too.
Do I have a motion to move the minor, first of all, we need a motion and a second to accept the amendments and discussion items, is that correct?
That's correct.
So moved.
The blue one.
Do I have a second?
Are you moving on the parking?
Just the amendments and discussion items.
Oh, okay. Second. Yeah.
So we have a motion and a second for the discussion items. Do I have a motion to move the minor and technical amendments package?
Including N1, yes.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second on the minor and technical amendments package, including N1. Okay, so now those items that have been moved and seconded will be moved to the amendments report that's going to be a subject of the January 18th hearing.
Okay, that's great. So we will follow the same process we've done in the past, and staff will introduce the items. Most of the items on the agenda today are actual proposed amendments. They're just a few discussion-only items. And then once staff gives a presentation, the council member who sponsored it can begin the discussion.
And just to be clear, as per usual, if there's no second, the proposed amendment will not be part of the amendments package that will be provided to us on January 18th.
Mayor, can I address that for a second?
Yes.
Because that's a slightly different process than we normally follow, and I just want to offer the public my perspective on that. By seconding an item, we are ensuring that we will have a further conversation about the item. We are not signaling that there is council support for the item. We are not locking in future action. In my view, having watched this unfold for a while, is that if one of my colleagues strongly is interested in further assessment of an item, I think it is good form to second it for the purpose of having a further discussion. But that does not mean that either the second or the rest of the council is in accord with the direction of that policy. It just means we want to have further discussion. I think that's important that people hear, because I think it comes close to being disrespectful not to push forward to the next phase, something that one of my colleagues thinks is of sufficient importance that they want to have follow-up further discussion. That's just how I look at it.
Yeah, and Commissioner Fish, I'd like to agree with that philosophy. And sometimes there are conversations that we need to have where people want to ask for more information. So I certainly concur with your viewpoint. So we're now looking at what we have in our packets as these very large foldouts. We are not going to go through them exactly in order. So we're going to start with the Table C items. Those are the scenic view items. We've had a lot of discussions about resources, scenic resources in the central city, views of Mount Hood, Mount St. Helens, and the city's skyline have been discussed, and they certainly contribute to our city's identity. And there has been a strong consensus that protecting many of those views is important for future generations. We obviously need to balance protecting views against our city's stated objectives around housing, jobs, and transportation as well. So not all 153 views that cross the central city can necessarily be protected, given that. Personally, I'm committing to finding the best mix possible that we can so that residents, employees, and visitors all have access to what I believe are some fairly unique views to our community. So, Mindy, I guess you're going to start off our conversation today with regard to the C items.
Yes, good afternoon, Commissioners. Mindy Brooks, Planning and Sustainability. And we've just got 2 items to discuss today. The first one is a view of the city skyline from Sullivan's Gulch. This is an existing viewpoint on the 12th Avenue overpass over I-84. There are height limits today that have been in place since 1991 to protect this view. And the staff recommendation from Planning and Sustainability Commission is to move the viewpoint from 12th Avenue to a yet-to-be-constructed bike and pedestrian bridge that'll be between 7th and 8th about, and then move the viewpoint and the heights accordingly. Excuse me. At the October session, there was a concept proposed to retain the existing viewpoint and the existing heights. And then based on additional conversations with Commissioner Salzman's staff, we have looked at 3 different options, which are the 3 in front of you, and I'm going to walk you through them. Before I walk through them, I just want to point out, on the screen, they're also in your packet if you want to fold them out and mark them. The gray dashed area is the full area where change could be considered, and there are different mixes within that gray dashed area. So option 1 is the recommendation that came forward. This moves the viewpoint to the new alignment of the bridge, and it puts the viewpoint in the center of that alignment and changes the heights accordingly. Option 2 is the existing heights that are in place now. So it would keep the viewpoint at 12th Avenue where it is now and keep the heights as they are today. And then option 3 is to move to the new bike ped bridge alignment, but move the viewpoint slightly south of center. And that'll change how the properties are impacted. So let me show that. So this is an image that shows all 3 of those options on top of each other. The red line, or maybe it's kind of brown on the screen now, but the red outline is the existing view corridor with the existing heights. The blue is the recommended view, which is the center line of the new alignment, and the yellow is the alternative, which shifts the viewpoint to the south of the alignment. And what I want to point out, first, by moving it from 12th to the new overpass, less of the properties on the north side are impacted, more to the south are impacted by the view corridor. But if between the 2 options, the blue and the yellow, the blue has more impacts to northern properties and the yellow has more impacts to the southern properties there. And the reason why staff chose the center line is because we don't know where a bump out of viewpoint would be designed on this new bridge. It hasn't been designed yet. And so we figured center is a good place to start from, and we can make adjustments later after there is a viewpoint. I want to point out on this, and maybe my cursor will work a little bit. Yeah. So this line here, this blue line that hopefully you can see that, is where the recommendation is. The yellow line is the new. So there are a number of properties that have never had height limits that if we choose option 3 would have height limits applied to them.
But none of the properties that are currently developed would interfere with the views in any of those looks or not?
We have tried very hard to make this based on what the development looks like now, to the extent that we can. Things keep developing, so we keep working on it, but we're trying to avoid properties that are already fully developed at a height. So I'm going to take it back to just this, I can flip back and forth if you want to see the other one, but these are the three options, again, set against themselves, and I will turn it over to you, Commissioner Salzman.
Thank you. So I do support the relocating the viewpoint to the new bridge, 7th Avenue Bridge, I guess I'll call it, and shifting the point of measurement to the south. So it was my understanding that if we did that, we would not impact southern properties any more than they are impacted by the current view shed, though. So I was a little perplexed by your coloring diagram there.
Yeah, they would be, so
Would be impacted, so it's not the same as lining up on the blue line. There is.
It's not. So if you shift the whole viewpoint from the center to the south, then that bottom line is where the view would come across the properties. So it does have more impact on the properties on the south to shift it that way.
Could you go back to the last slide, options 1, 2, and 3? So Commissioner Salzman, is the proposal you're discussing now option 3, the alternate view?
I believe that is option 3.
Okay.
That is
Yeah,
option
okay,
3,
that is
correct.
option 3.
Okay.
One of the things that's hard to assess, I mean, the next slide, if we can go forward, that does a really good job visually showing us the impact, but it doesn't really tell us what the true impact is, because we don't have information about the underlying zoning intentions with regard to the impacted property. So what is your guidance to us for how we make this decision? Since, again, you've done a very good job showing us the impact of visually, how the sight line would change, but it doesn't really give us information about how it would impact future development or existing property owners.
Sure. So staff recommendation would be to leave it at the center for now, which would be the blue area with the blue line. That has been the proposal all along, so all the property owners that were impacted by that have been noticed and have had an opportunity to come forward. When the design is done for this bridge, and I understand that it is moving along, the new bridge will be coming along. Once we know where a viewpoint will actually be designed, we can make changes to this. We can come back and actually change it based on the view, the actual viewpoint and view itself. So that would be the recommendation.
And my only concern with the alternative view currently is what Dan alluded to a second ago, which is the expanded impact on properties and not knowing really what is the consequence of that.
Right, and, right.
Although in looking at the properties, if I'm not mistaken, that big shaded area, Northeast 3rd and Burnside, wouldn't that be the building that was just built, the high-rise there? So, I mean, there's nothing we can do that's going to impact its height.
Right. Are you referring to the Yards building?
The yards, right. I think that's what that big block is there.
Right there.
Here.
Yeah, right there.
Right. This right here, this edge, can you see
Yeah.
the cursor?
Right.
Can't see
That
it.
is the edge. So even moving it to the south, the Yards building would be just outside of the view.
Okay.
And that was intentional when we drew
Okay.
it to begin with, because the Yards building blocks that side of the view, so we wouldn't want to include.
Right.
Where's Hooper Detox on this, just to be clear?
I'm not sure. Let me ask
Between Cooch and Burnside on MLK.
Bert. Okay.
The old-
Okay, so it would, a bit of.
So that's out.
Yeah, okay.
That would be
out.
outside. This is Cooch, this
So
is Burnside.
Move a little north from there for a sec on your cursor, keep going. What's that building? Because that's clearly impacted by the expansion.
I think that's Stark.
Maybe Stark Vacuum? No?
No, they're on the west side, I think.
On the west side of Davis.
Oh, maybe you're right.
Well, I think that, I guess the point I was trying to make is, and maybe it's a wrong point, but it looked like maybe a lot of these properties have already been redeveloped. They're already at their new heights. They're not likely to be impacted, but if that's not a true statement, then maybe we should carry it forward. I guess I'm reluctant to sort of leave uncertain for a long period of time where that view shed is going to fall, because that does, you know, people don't like uncertainty.
Yes.
Property owners don't like uncertainty. And I'm not sure what the process, I know the 7th Avenue Bridge is under discussion and all that, and it's been funded by this council. So it may be relatively quick, but then.
Yeah.
So I guess if, I'd like to see us carry this forward to a January 18th discussion and vote, and I'd like, my homework assignment would be to find out more about the schedule for the 7th Avenue Bridge.
Okay.
And when we could actually, but I do think the 7th Avenue Bridge is the best point to measure the view shed from. It's just a question of whether we move it south or not.
And Dan, may I ask, may I add a homework assignment?
Yeah.
Could we get an annotated map with the impacted
Absolutely.
properties and just let us know? Because there could be some winners and losers here, and I'd just like to know how it works.
So let me just be clear, Commissioner Salzman, you are recommending option 3.
Right.
And Commissioner Fish, you are asking for, when we come back to you with the hearing, that we bring you, well,
More
in
detailed
advance of that,
information
bring
about
you the
who's
information.
impacted by
Yep.
the different corridor.
Do you want to forward that as an amendment then for a discussion?
Okay?
Sound?
Yeah, and I guess I just don't want to foreclose moving the viewpoint south.
Very
Yep.
good. Then let's
Okay.
go ahead and move that. And is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's
Okay.
moved by
Okay.
Commissioner Saltzman, second by Commissioner Fish. Moving on to the next one, Mindy, I believe that's C7, the view from Upper Hall.
Yes.
And I believe that's just being offered up as a discussion item as opposed to anybody proffering an amendment.
Correct. So this is the view from Upper Hall. It's, as you can see on the screen, it's a panoramic view of all 3 area mountains and the central city skyline itself. This is actually one of 2 locations in the central city where you can see Mount Adams and where we protect the view of Mount Adams. The other is from the Rose Garden, where we protect this view. The testimony, or the maps on the screen here are the existing and the recommended heights. And so the recommendation was to leave the base height alone, but that the bonus height would need to come from 460 to 410 in order to be protective of that view of Mount Adams. And I think I'll leave it there unless if there are questions about that.
And that is the block where the food carts are presently located on
Yes,
10th and Yamhill?
yes.
Yeah.
So the recommended maximum heights, but you're not asking us to do anything on that?
There was no amendment offered. There was just a request that we discuss this one.
410 is what's already proposed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that is what is proposed, is reducing the bonus height from 460 to 410 to protect this view.
Can I ask a question that's not necessarily related to the zoning question? The view you showed us on Upper Hall, where is that from? Is that from a sidewalk?
It is.
And is that view in any way protected from adjacent private property owners?
Do you mean from development?
Yes.
That would block it
Yes,
from
I should have
adjacent
said
property owners?
protected by as opposed to
Yeah.
protected from.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Today, that is a protected view. There's actually a height limit just in front of the view that doesn't extend very far. It's a 30-foot height limit that protects the immediate view itself. Most of it is actually right away because Upper Hall's a hairpin turn. So a lot of that height limit is actually sitting on right of way.
Okay, so I'll just throw out a marker for further discussion that has nothing to do with zoning, and that is, you know, sometimes I trudge up that thing on my bike. People have gotten very, very creative with plantings in order to block those views from the public. And if we are going to take the time, energy, and resources to protect these views as a public asset, then we need to talk about planting strategies.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
didn't even know you could get those things to grow 30 feet tall, but people have managed to figure it out. All right, so.
Can I ask one question on
yeah,
this, on the
please,
recommended
Commissioner Fish.
height? The 2 properties to the east, are those the 2 structures which are now being renovated to hotels? Is that one of those, the historic building on the corner and the The other one, the building that used to be office, but they're both now being turned into hotels. Am I in the right?
The Woodlark building?
I'm seeing general nods from my colleagues.
And those are being renovated. One of them's a historic structure. They're being renovated. So they're not actually going to be built anytime soon above. We're just talking about the empty lot
Right.
and a modest reduction to protect the view corridor.
Correct.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay.
So we don't need an amendment on that item. We're going to shift gears and go over to item E1. This is Volunteers of America. Troy, I believe you're going to give us some background on this one.
I am, Mayor. I'm Troy Doss with Bureau of Planning Sustainability. You may recall that when we were taking public testimony, the Volunteers of America came in and they requested that there would be a zone change for a property they own in the Central East Side. The property is currently zoned IG1. It's an industrial zone. Actually falls in the industrial sanctuary classification. But on that site is a pre-existing women's treatment center that's been there really since the 1930s, and then daycare was added approximately 1990s. They'd like to redevelop the site with the same use and expand it, modernize it, but the current zoning does not allow for that. So their request was, can we rezone it to EX, which is a mixed-use zone, and it would remove it from the industrial classification. The Central East Side Industrial Council was concerned about the loss of industrial land there. We tend to agree with them on that. And so we were directed to try to find a way to allow the use in this situation that wouldn't completely change the base zone. So what we've done is we've proposed an amendment for the Central East Side that basically would say, if you're an established existing use in the Central East Side and you already have group living, community service, or daycare uses, you can redevelop on site. And you can redevelop to a FAR floor area ratio of 3:1. That gives them approximately 120,000 square feet of development potential. It's consistent with the current approach towards industrial office uses in the district, and Volunteers of America said this would work perfectly for them, and it's consistent with the direction that the Central East Side Industrial Council has asked us to go.
This would be as of right, so it's not a conditional use?
As of right.
So it's not subject to a 10-year renewal?
No.
If you follow these guidelines, unless you discontinue the...
If you discontinue, then we'd go back to the industrial use classifications primarily. They'd have to go through that process.
You know, just by way of history, Volunteers of America acquired a lot of property in this corridor at a time when it wasn't deemed to be very attractive, it was not the most valuable dirt in the city, but from donors and people through their estates who gave land. So they have some sites, and they held on to them, and now, of course, it's a very desirable area with access to transit. So I think that's why there's strong sentiment on the council to allow them to develop a public benefit like this.
So I'll turn this back over to the mayor, I believe.
Well, very good. Certainly, I'll move it.
Second?
We have a motion and a second, so we'll continue that. And I believe we're all very supportive of this, and I want to thank you for working with the Central East Side Industrial Group to forge what I think is a really common sense proposal here. VOA has done a lot of great work in the community over the decades, and we certainly want to see that continue. Commissioner
It's
Fritz.
also a brilliant solution. Well done. Thank you.
Yeah, it's
Thank
good. Very good thinking. Next up is Table M, South Waterfront. Troy, can you walk us through the potential amendment?
Yeah, this one, there was a request from Zidell. They're putting a master plan together for the Zidell yards. And one of the things that this proposal, and eventually OHSU is probably likely to find as well, is when we adopted the South Waterfront Plan, we established a greenway setback. And we do want development to be set back from that. But on top of that, there was a height setback that was applied. And when you look at how it's applied to the district, it works really well when you're measuring east to west from the edge of the greenway setback. But when you look at how the greenway comes in around the barge facility, it really starts to impact properties much further into the district, and it affects 3 primary development parcels, 2 which are currently in play. So what they'd asked is that we find an approach that would allow them to go forward. What we've proposed is that although we would maintain the greenway setback exactly where it is and around the bargeway, we would straighten the line for the height setback so that really you still have a setback for development, but in terms of taller buildings, in this case 150 feet as opposed to 125 feet, they would not be affected by this provision.
What's the difference between the 2 slides?
The one to the left is showing how the height setback is kind of following the contours of the districts along the top of the bank that's more associated with the greenway setback. And what we've done is we've straightened that line out to be more specific to just height. Again, the greenway setback has remained, so what you see on the left is really showing that setback. On the right, you're seeing what would be the height setback.
It's hard to see, but there's sort of a little divot about halfway down on the left there, and what that represents is the bottom of their spillway, and that's why it
Oh, I see.
it dipped in the way it did.
It does, and in fact, you see another one that comes up here, and that reflects actually an old culvert that used to be in the greenway that's no longer there. It's been restored, but anyway, we were contouring it based on the contours we had in 2003. Things have changed. Regardless, for this situation, though, the going in around the bargeway itself, and if you apply that same logic, it really starts to push back into development much further into the district than was anticipated. So we recommend straightening the height setback, leaving the rest of it the same.
Well, I like this solution. I think it's a good solution to the height issue without complicating the south waterfront setback issue, which the greenway requirements, which this council obviously supports. So I'd certainly like to move this as an amendment.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion on this item? Very good. Moving on to O1, flexible building design policy. Troy, can you walk us through the amendments?
Yes, there was discussion and testimony regarding primarily focused on parking structures. Can we, if we have city-owned parking structures that are developed, can we create them in such a way that they can be repurposed later on for other uses? This started to strike a chord. We remember other people saying this during the development of the concept plan several years back, saying, well, why not have that similar approach to all buildings, really, to the extent possible? So rather than creating a policy statement that really focuses exclusively on parking structures, we put this together that says we want to encourage building flexibility for any structure, including parking structures, so that they might be repurposed over time.
Well, I think you biased the conversation by showing a photograph of that particular structure. I'll certainly move this as an amendment if there's a second.
Second.
Great, we have lots of interest. Next up is O2, the Green Loop resolution. Mark, you want to come up and join us, please? Thanks, Troy.
Thanks, Mayor, Commissioners. So this amendment came out of testimony we received on the Green Loop resolution, specifically from a letter from the Climate Justice Collaborative, and thinking more broadly about the citywide system of city greenways in the comprehensive plan and how to sort of forward other projects around the community. So the Green Loop is definitely part of a system of these city greenways throughout the city. We've been working a lot with the Lens community, Green Lens, and forwarding the Lens Green Ring specifically. And we'd like to also add some other projects to think about citywide, not just in Lens, but also in North Portland and potentially in the Sullivan's Gulch Trail as well. This amendment would sort of give the authorization to city staff to kind of raise our level of engagement sort of citywide to kind of forward these kinds of projects as a holistic sort of effort to improve parkways and these greenways throughout the city. As we work on the Green Loop, we can forward other initiatives as well. So that's sort of the bulk of this amendment.
Mayor, if I could just make a comment. I'm going to support this, but I think it's redundant for a couple of reasons. One is we're doing Central City 2035, and if we take this to its extreme, everything that we're doing in 2035, someone could say, well, we want some consideration for something outside of Central City, and by definition, we are limited in our focus to the Central City. Number two, this says we're authorizing people to work with community partners. I don't want there to be any doubt that we are currently engaged in those conversations. In fact, the North Portland Greenway has been a long-standing priority of this council. The completing the 40-mile loop, figuring out this vision, linking it to Sullivan's Gulch. I mean, these are all bedrock city policies. So I just want to say I'm happy to support this, but technically we're talking about Central City 2035. And I don't want to, I mean, I think we shouldn't just take each of these up each time because some group feels like we haven't given adequate weight to something that's beyond the scope of the project. But I don't want the quote, you are authorized to work with the community to be interpreted as we're not already working with the community. These are things that the council is deeply committed to. And we technically don't need an amendment to reaffirm what we're already doing, but
Could we do a friendly rewording of this? Because I'm compelled by what Commissioner Fish just said. Could we say are authorized to continue to work? Because I agree with you. This sounds like we're starting something new, but in fact, we're continuing an established policy. We're clarifying it and codifying it in the 2035 plan. But Commissioner Fish is right. If somebody just picks this up and reads it, one could get the impression we're just starting from scratch, and we most certainly are not. Is that acceptable to everybody to make that
yeah, I think that's
wording
better.
change?
And I think the legislative history is now clearer about, but
Good.
again, I don't think it's necessary, but I'm happy to second it.
Good. Then I'll move it.
Great.
Very good. Parking. Mauricio, do you want to come up and walk us through some of the proposed amendments with regard to parking?
Yes, Mauricio Leclerc with PBOT. Let's see. We have two, N2 and N3, so jumping right in. The first one, we owe our thanks to our staff at BDS and BPS. They highlighted the potential loophole and a way in which our intended laws may, backfire on us. So basically, we define structured parking a certain, surface parking a certain way. And since the 70s, we've been trying to minimize the amount of surface parking, and we regulate parking policy in the central city by limiting the amount of surface parking and by limiting the amount of parking that can be done with our new development. We've done this code does both, further limitations to surface parking as well as, more limits as to how much parking you can build. Well, it has come to our attention, thanks to BDS and BPS stuff, that you could interpret surface parking as, you can have a surface parking lot and put a carport on top, like a light roof, and suddenly that would become structured parking. That's exactly what we don't want to do that. So in a way to preempt that sort of a interpretation of the code, we want to clarify what we mean by that. So basically here it says that it has to actually have a building on top of it to be surface parking, to be structured parking. Oh yeah, sorry, here. So that's the language basically says surface parking and structured parking with no gross building area above are prohibited. So you, just a little thin roof over a parked car is not structured parking. Likewise, we want to clarify that if you are on top of a building, you could park there, like we do have in some smart parks, that it's okay. So long as you have a building, a full building below it, or a building above it, that we consider it structured parking. If not, it's just surface parking. I think that would clarify the code.
So I'll about to move or second this. I have a friendly amendment which I just noticed. In Part A, it says, but nothing above it. Could we perhaps say no building area above it? Because we wouldn't mind if there was solar panels or something.
No built area above it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that clarifies it even better. No area above it. Can you? Yeah. So
let me ask you another question. Today's Willamette Week had a suggestion that we tax the hell out of surface parking in order to encourage development. And I'm reminded that Charlie Hale's chief of staff, Josh, when he ran for council in 2002, ran on a platform of taxing the hell out of surface parking lot. And I think John Russell was a big booster of that, and there might have been strong opposition from another developer at the time. I'm just reminded of it as we're going through this. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'm just noting that it's been something that's been kicked around as changing our tax code to tax impervious surface differently as a way of encouraging development. Yeah. It has nothing to do with this.
Right, but it...
I withdraw my comment.
Yeah, but it does support the idea that we've been trying so hard since the 70s to redevelop the surface parking lot. We don't want to actually encourage more by not clarifying what the code means. So this one requires somebody to introduce an amendment. So.
All right, so Commissioner Fritz found a friendly way to change that. Do you want to take that as a motion?
Yes, please.
We have a motion. We have a second for N2. N1, of course, we move to the technical package. So next up is N3 OHSU parking.
All right, so
ratio, sorry.
So on that one, we received.
One moment. Oh. So with the parking, because I don't have the entire code language in front of me,
it's hard to know exactly how that technical amendment works, and so it would be our recommendation to check in with the code writers and see the full context. So there might be, after we've had a chance to look at it, there might be a further clarification. I
Okay,
just
so
wanna flag that.
and can somebody work on that while we're in session and bring it back to us before we leave?
Yes.
Is that on,
So it's the three, we have A, but we don't have B and C, and so, yeah, we can do our best. We'll do that
Okay,
now.
yeah, let's see if we can get it done so we don't have to revisit it.
We just save space.
well, it's just that it just says the relettered.
So she wants to do.
But you were not addressing any of those, right? You just
No.
wanted to be talked.
No.
Yeah,
You're just changing the
it.
word nothing to no built area.
Yeah.
That's at least an hour
nothing.
conversation, right?
Yeah, I'm not changing anything in B and C.
Okay, so we'll let,
Okay.
you'll just make sure that there's no lack of parallelism, whatever the word is.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're at N3.
All right, so the
OHSU parking ratios.
So the second one is OHSU sent a letter, also PSU signed it, that basically said that they're okay with the work that we've done on parking. You know, we've actually further limits how much you can build in South Waterfront. But they are explaining a concern, which is valid according to staff, that the way they have been, that the rules for preservation parking, which is basically parking for after your building has been built, you can build more to meet your entitlement. The way we wrote the code doesn't quite work to how their master plan is being implemented. So basically, they want a little bit more flexibility to be able to do the things that are in the master plan. Basically, the idea would be to be able, they don't want to, they haven't been building parking with each building. They've been trying to bank it so that, like a campus, a normal campus has buildings, and then parking is grouped in a special place. So they've been doing that by what this new code does is provide a trigger. You need to have less parking than a certain amount to be able to qualify. That would disqualify many of their buildings from getting the parking that they had accounted for in their master plan. So a long story short, this gives them the flexibility to keep doing what they're doing, to create the parking that they need and to continue to create their master plan, to fulfill their master plan.
Mauricio, I've been spending a lot of time down there lately, and the parking, the existing parking is beyond capacity. And I think with the new buildings online, it's going to continue to. But the beauty of the way they have configured their parking is to get it off the streets and get it to places as quickly as possible, which I think is important. Is there a downside to this? Are we opening the door to something that's unintended?
Well, we're trying to avoid, well, in terms of the total amount of parking, not necessarily, because we have actually lowered how much they can ultimately get. We're trying to avoid an adverse effect, which would be that if we do not adjust what we're trying to do now, each OHSU would be forced to build parking with every new building and actually try to build as much parking with every building as possible to compensate for what they cannot do according to the code. So in a way, we're trying to avoid overbuilding parking and allow them to build it when they need it in a more strategic manner. So I don't think there's much of a downside. And we're limiting this to medical offices and colleges and to the South Waterfront area, which has already a unique circumstances, has an established campus, and it's very hard already to build parking there. It's very expensive to build, especially underground. So I think we're not under the danger of overbuilding parking in this district as a result of this policy change.
Commissioner Fritz, did you have a question?
I just was willing to move it forward for the point of discussion. I do have some concerns about whether it overly broadens it.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second then on N3. That takes us next to height and FAR. Rachel, you want to come up and walk us through some of these proposals? Joe, thank you.
I'm just interested in the discussion. Just want to bring it forward for discussion.
Good afternoon, Rachel Hoy with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So the next table that we're going to walk through is Table B. So that should be at the front of your packet. These are the two items that we're going to talk about. So this first item, this is a discussion item, so no amendment has been put forward. The request is to increase the FAR on the half block at 87 Southwest Stark. So the current FAR at this, on this half block is 4-1. Request is to go to 6-1. This, I will point out that this whole area from the Markham Bridge to the Broadway Bridge along the riverfront, the FAR is 4-1. So staff's recommendation has been to maintain that FAR at 4-1. Generally, we have lower FARs along the waterfront to align with lower heights. And this, I would just point out, this site can receive bonus FAR up to 3-1. So I just want to turn that over if there's further discussion that you would like to have about this particular item.
It can receive bonus 3-1 on top of the 4-1?
That's right. These are their base FARs. So all of these sites have the ability, including this one, to get an additional 3-1 bonus.
Trying to just remember what's there. Is it like a record store and a tattoo parlor?
That's a parking, or, I'm sorry, that's a surface lot.
It's a surface lot?
At this particular site. And it is, again, the way we've outlined it, it's, the request is for that half block. The half of, to the north is within the historic district.
And what rationale has been put forward for this increase?
Part of the rationale was the proximity to, just to the west. The FAR is 9-1. So an interest in having an FAR similar to the adjacent sites. So I guess our rationale has been, it's also, this is a kind of a narrow area along the waterfront, and we've typically, the pattern we've maintained is a 4-1 pattern along our riverfront.
All right, good. I don't sense any urgency to put forth any amendments on that. Is there any further discussion anybody wants to have on this particular item? Very good. B5, River Place height and master plan adjustments. Joe, I think
So
you
I
were...
have to,
oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner
I have to
Schultz.
excuse myself due to my family's ownership interests in properties that could be impacted by the changes in height for this amendment, so I will excuse myself. And
Duly
come back when
noted.
you're done
Don't
discussing
go
it.
far.
Okay.
So next up, B5, River Place height master plan adjustments. Joe or Rachel, I'm not sure.
I'm just going to start out, and I want to recap a little bit. We did talk about a River Place testimony that was received, and through that testimony, the owner of the site had requested additional height allowances at this location, as you can see highlighted in red on the map. They did not request any increases to density. And I just want to point out, this is a different proposal than the one that went before the Planning and Sustainability Commission. A little background on the site, as you can see here on the slide, the current heights are mostly at 125 feet. There is some area at 150. The existing floor area ratio of the site is 4-1. And the map to the right shows the Planning and Sustainability did vote to increase the maximum heights from 200 on the western edge of the site, and it slowly decreases from 150 to 125, approaching the river. The PSC also raised the FAR on the site from 4-1 to 5-1 for this area highlighted in red. Their rationale there was to maximize redevelopment potential of the site and its inclusion of affordable housing in the future. So the property owner request is requesting basically the same building height limits common to the adjacent South Waterfront subdistrict. And those heights range from 325 to 150 as you approach the river. And in addition, the request was for one iconic building up to 400 feet within the redevelopment area. The owner suggested that the need for this additional height was to help meet public objectives, especially in the case of the concept they submitted. Their concept included a publicly accessible park that, combined with access ways, is close to 2 acres of the 8-acre site. They also proposed a taller building as a way to achieve allowed densities while still including these additional public benefits. So I'm going to turn this over to Joe.
Joe Zender with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So I just wanted to walk us quickly through the rationale that we brought to building the recommendation that's in front of you today, or the proposed amendment. When we looked at the height allowances on this site, the proposal and the current owner who started this discussion with the Planning and Sustainability Commission has a particular idea and development program. When we're setting allowances for that, but also in case another developer is ultimately, and another plan is ultimately going to be what's built here, but we want to put in place allowances that make sense with the location and with our approach to height in the central city and on the waterfront. So these 7 sort of considerations that are on the slide here are versions of the same ones that we have been talking about for a while now that we've used elsewhere in the central city. Principle number 1 is that height increases in Central City 2035 are only coming through a bonus, and that is true of this case. The current base height limits would stay the same, but we're talking about allowing more height, but only through a bonus, and that bonus is our inclusionary housing program to start with. Secondly, we're continuing something that you've talked a lot about, which is to protect public views. And here we have a public view from Terwilliger of Mount St. Helens, and it's from a pull-off. It's a full-on public view with a viewing area. And when you look at the proposal, that's why there's this lower height swath cutting through the center of the site. So we've managed to do that. Part of what we see in talking with the particular proposal that's on the table now is that indeed for the amount of development that we would like to see on the riverfront and in River Place, to bring it even up to what is allowed today, because in that first generation of the development of this site, it was built at a lot lower density than is actually even allowed, because it was built in the 80s and the 90s. When you allow buildings to go vertical, you open the ability to have more open area, circulation area, and these open spaces. You have more options to get a better design to introduce a relatively large precinct, a new large development into our city and into our waterfront. So that was a compelling argument, and one that we've used on the Broadway corridor and the post office. This is not a new thinking, it's just was compelling when applied to here. So when we thought about those approaches, we have a precedent that we've already negotiated and deliberated through for an extended period of time, and that's the rules that we use in South Waterfront. And so we looked at those in addition to the height allowances, and we're going to bring those up and apply them to the site, as Rachel will explain next. So we have a precedent and a set of approaches that talks about how close towers can be together. How do you get visual and physical permeability, ways through the site so it doesn't just become a wall? How do you look at shadows? How do you look at the public realm? Those we're bringing up into the proposal as well. So we have that precedent to use here. In that precedent, like I said, we elsewhere in the central city, we considered the impact of where we allow more or less height on adjacent parks. And in this one, we have an interesting situation where it's adjacent to Waterfront Park, and if we're able to get, by going vertical, more open space on the site, and I'll arrange that so it's next to the Waterfront Park, that could be one of the biggest additions to that open space system that we've made in a while. We want to leverage major transit investments. We have streetcar here. We've already invested. It's up the hill, but near our extension of the MAX line as well. And the whole discussion started, and possibly even at the PSC, there was enthusiasm for reinvestment in the waterfront. Doesn't take necessarily this scale to do it, but when we step back and look what was right for the site and consistent with our plans, that's the basis on which we made the recommendation that Rachel's going to give you.
So I'm going to walk you through a couple of slides to further lay out the proposed amendments. This is the view corridor that we're talking about from Terwilliger Parkway, a view of Mount St. Helens that Central City 2035 preserves. Here is another aerial showing you how the view corridor crosses the site. And so just to talk through some of the proposal for height here, we'd like to propose that the base height remains at 125 across the entire site. The red arrows point to two areas. I wonder if my cursor works. Yeah, so these two red areas, arrows point to two areas outside of the view corridor that may go up to 325 feet. This height is the maximum that can be achieved in South Waterfront. As Joe mentioned, also similar to South Waterfront, staff has put together some code language that's in your packet for additional standards that would be required that these be narrower towers should the project want to go to these heights. Other proposed heights within the site, within the view corridor itself, in this area, the proposal is up to 250 feet, and this goes down as you approach the river to 150 feet. There are also proposed additional standards that would apply to the entire site that will require special building spacing. So as Joe referred to avoid these kind of long walls through the development, so special spacing between buildings, special orientation of buildings, so we have better visual permeability through the site. So here is another picture of what the view would look like with these potential height opportunity areas, as I mentioned.
Can I ask you a question? Mm-hmm. Given that you've made a lot about narrower buildings to protect sightlines, why does this picture look like Co-op City?
So that, and this is just the way that we do our modeling. We haven't sculpted these buildings at all. It simply is just to show.
Just to be clear, listening to Joe.
Yes.
Under the view that he expressed, there would be lots of separation between buildings and discrete corridors. It would not be a wall like this.
These are not buildings.
That's correct.
Yes.
These are just an envelope.
It's important, yeah, this is the FAR envelope.
Yes, that's correct.
It's important to note that we don't want to misrepresent either way,
Right.
like by designing something that's our fantasy. The design review process and these rules we put in place is going to make this work no matter what development team or proposal moves forward.
Just by way of an interesting exercise for some other day, do this exercise on the South Waterfront as it is allowed versus what is actually built, and you'll see that actual results may vary considerably from the envelope.
And it also varies considerably for what was expected, because I was on the Planning Commission when we heard similar arguments that would be plenty of views down the green streets and that really there would be a lot of ways to see through because of the sculpting of the buildings. And my impression is that really hasn't turned out so well. So I'm quite concerned about this one.
So this is a slide, interesting, showing you a cross-section from downtown Park Avenue down to the waterfront. This actually cuts straight through the building that we're in, the 1900 building. So it gives you an idea. What we've done here in gray and black are, it's a profile of the existing buildings. The orange line shows you the recommended heights that are in the recommended draft. So you'll see from the Transit Mall at 460, the gradual step down to the river in the heights. The area in green are the proposed amended heights for the River Place area.
So it would go up to 325, even though it's behind it is 250.
That, yes, this is to show you, yes, the area in green would be, if those, that would be the amount that they could go up to, the maximum amount as proposed, up to 325. It still does represent with the bluff in this area.
Is the 250, yeah, mean sea level, or is it above ground? Where's the 250?
Above
Ground.
Yes.
Okay, so in fact, it is stair-stepped up.
Yeah, if we were to approve this amendment, it would stair step up.
Did my point make any sense, or is it
Yeah.
one of these things where I have cartoons on the inside of
No,
the
you said
island?
exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
great, all right,
It
good.
it does
All right.
stair step up,
Okay.
and this diagram shows how that works with the grade differential
right,
between
good.
That's right, with the bluff.
the top of the hill and the waterfront.
Still stair step.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got it, good, thank you, just checking.
Sure.
You're right.
So just to summarize, so there are a set of 5 proposed amendments to put forward. So I'll walk through those. And so the first one is to apply a height opportunity area. So the areas in red on the map would be considered height opportunity areas. In these areas, bonus height may go up to 325. There would be additional standards that would apply, similar to South Waterfront, for the building massing that would result in narrower towers within these areas should a project decide to go to those heights. The other heights on the site would range from 250 to 150 as you approach the river. Number 2, there would be a requirement for additional standards that would apply to the entire site that would require spacing between additional spacing between buildings and orientation of buildings to allow visual permeability through the site. Number 3, require a master plan for the site. So Joe talked a bit about this. This is a new tool that we've revised in the Central City Plan that would provide an urban design and development framework for the site. It would address site elements, for example, the location of open space, connectivity through the site for public and private streets and access ways, as well as requiring shadow studies to preserve light and air on parks and adjacent open space and the waterfront. Number 4, this is also an element of the master plan. There is, as I mentioned, an open area requirement within the master plan. For this particular site, we've proposed that there would be open area adjacent to South Waterfront Park. And that is the open space just adjacent to this property. It is adjacent to the waterfront, and they would be required to have some level of open space to improve the access to the waterfront. Number 5 is a minor technical amendment, but one that we do need to make that corrects the view corridor that you saw mapped of the Terwilliger, from Terwilliger Parkway, and it's updating our scenic resource protection map to align with a more correct elevation for the site. So those are the 5 amendments on the table, and I'd like to turn it over to the mayor.
I want to hear from Commissioner Fish, but can we move these as a package?
That was our thinking.
Okay.
Mayor, I just have a couple of questions just to clarify this before we move anything. So, Joe, I got a couple letters from people saying you shouldn't do this because it's spot zoning. So, could you address that for me?
Right, and spot zoning, spot zoning has a bad name when, in the cases where it's applied for the particular benefit of a particular property, and in the past it may have been for a particular property owner outside of the context of the overall plan. That's sort of the baggage that concept carries. And so when you consider your major rezonings, you want to do it in the context of the area around it, and that makes it not a spot zone, but full-on contextual thinking. And that's in part why we wanted to go through those considerations, because we wanted to show you that, yes, this is a property, it's a big property, but the way we're thinking about it is consistent with the rest of what we've tried to reason through in 2035, and we're doing it as part of 2035, so.
So thank you. Second question, is the only, you said this is subject to the bonus to get the height, and is the only trigger for the bonus inclusionary housing?
Correct.
So you couldn't get the height because you want to add commercial space?
The only way to access the bonus system in this location is to use the inclusionary housing program. Once you've satisfied that, you could move on to transfer provisions that are available in the code, but you the threshold is inclusionary housing.
And so that's, from your point of view, part of the public benefit.
Correct, and that's even when we did this in the past, that is the heart of the public benefit, yes.
And my final question is, since we're talking a lot about design, how it looks, master plan, could you just give me just a quick reminder, what's the council's role with respect to either design or the master plan? If at some point we go forward with this plan.
Well, and I'm going to make sure, the master plan is a new provision. The master plan requires that the phased development of the site be thought through in a public process that's overseen by the Design Commission. Upon appeal, I believe that the master plan process will end up in front of City Council if we're not able to.
That is baked in as a safety valve.
It is, yes. And
does the design, and then you anticipated my final question, the Design Review Commission would oversee the master plan process. Are there specific design guidelines that can be applied to any tower above a certain height? Do we have that option to put that requirement in?
Well, we've baked those into the rules that we've imported from South Waterfront.
So that would go to design review?
Yes, that actually sits in the code and parts of, and we've added some of the amendments that you're making today, add guidance to the design review process as they look at the master plan.
If I could just make one clarification to add to what Joe has said. Commissioner Fish, you asked about the triggers for the bonus and if it would be inclusionary housing. The only, just to be clear, so the proposal we received was for, it's a concept for a residential development, and certainly that would trigger affordable housing. If there was a building that came in and it was a straight commercial, no residential development, they would have the choice of going to the Affordable Housing Fund, or they could go to the Historic Resource Transfer. They have a choice if they're a purely commercial building.
And I'd want to know more about that because the whole thing has been framed in terms of a benefit around affordable housing. And one of the things I don't fully understand is what the off-ramps are that could result in height without that benefit. And while we can't, it may be that for market reasons or other reasons it never gets built if we proceed with this, but I want to make sure there aren't other ways around IZ, because to me that's one of the few compelling parts of this.
And again, that would just be a straight commercial building, which is somewhat, we see mostly a lot of mixed use now. So, and it's, most of our projects are triggering affordable housing. You build 20 units or more, and you've triggered affordable housing.
Couldn't we just say that there's no bonus for a commercial building?
Well, one could, but just to be clear, even if, how many acres is this, Rachel?
It's an 8-acre site.
So even if it was 8 acres of strictly commercial building, if it needs bonus floor area to build out its program, it will need to participate in the inclusionary housing program. And just for a strictly commercial building, the approach is not to build units, but to pay into the fund. And that we've structured so that's, it still is part of the inclusionary housing program, but it might not necessarily have housing on the site if there is no housing on the site. We haven't seen 8 acres of exclusively commercial development in the central city, I think, almost ever.
Very good. Well, first of all, thank you for doing the work. Thank you for making these amendments that I think address some of the public interest issues that have been raised, open space, access to the river, making sure that tower width and spacing requirements are put into place, protecting the view corridors, the visual permeability issues that Commissioner Fritz has raised. With that, I'd like to move it.
So, Mayor, I have some unresolved questions about this, but I think it is worth continuing the conversation, and so I will second your amendment.
Thank you, Commissioner Fish. I appreciate that. Next up, Master Plan L2, sharing and consolidation of resources. Rachel, I think you're up for this.
Yes, so this is, again, dealing with our new master plan provision for the Central City. This is a new approval criterion that we're proposing. This is coming from working closely with BDS, as we're finding that some of our master plan sites are beginning to do their own master planning and getting ready for the city submittal. We're finding that this is a new approval criterion that would be very beneficial. It is in the vein of let's have these projects show us how they can efficiently use resources and their space on site, and how they can consolidate. So for example, consolidate parking and consolidate access to parking, their mechanical equipment, trash and recycling. So it's also a way to show how we're going to maximize the use of ground floor for more active uses.
I'd like to move this. Colleagues, are there any questions? We have a motion, a second. Any further discussion or questions for Rachel? Very good. Now we're to bonuses and transfers, part 2. Our next item is G4, to allow FAR transfers from open space. Rachel?
Yes. So this proposed amendment to allow FAR transfers from open space, staff supports this amendment as it will provide an additional pool of FAR for the bonus and transfer system. It offers another option to meeting development and density goals in the Central City. The slide before you provides the necessary code updates that would be needed simply by adding open space or OS to the list. And I'd like to turn it over to the Commissioner Fritz if there's any more discussion on this amendment.
Very basic thing, so I move the amendment.
I'll second it. It seems very straightforward.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that particular item? Moving along to item G3. That's transfer within a sub-district, sometimes known as the SEIU proposal. Joe, do you want to talk about this one?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
And I understand nobody's offered amendment, but there was a request for discussion on this. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and I was not thinking of offering an amendment, but as time has gone by and I've looked at the complexity of this, I think there might be merit in moving it forward, at least for discussion.
Joe?
I didn't tell you that yesterday because I had only just thought about it.
Well, great. So the proposal that was considered by the Planning and Sustainability Commission and then considered again in the City Council process from SEIU is to change the transfer within a sub-district, one of the 2 transfers that the new Central City Plan would allow, and make it a transfer that, with certain triggers, would only make transfer floor area available for for commercial development of a certain scale if service workers working in that building make 50% median family income. The way that the transfer would be administered and recorded is that to get the transfer, the developer would have to provide building and development services with a covenant that records that this condition is in the property's records, in the property's deeds. As the building is built and the building is operated, if at any point in that time this condition is not being met, that enforcement mechanism would require, would create the opportunity to be enforced through court action by a third party. So this is something new, but not just through a zoning enforcement action, but it could be raised through a court proceeding. And the historic property transfers would still be available. That was the idea. The Planning and Sustainability Commission and staff considered the notion of finding means to promote living wage jobs, especially in the service sector, especially in our Central City where so much of those jobs exist, is a worthy goal. And like many worthy goals, the zoning code and this particular zoning provision we don't think is a workable or effective or appropriate place to try to do that. And let me just explain.
Actually, Joe, if I could maybe cut this short, I share many of your concerns, and I'm not convinced that this is entirely the right way to move it forward either. But I don't want this to get lost, because I think it's a very important concept. So rather than going into all of the pros and cons now, this is one that I'd really like to just continue the discussion.
And I'd like to explain why I'll second this with a condition. We put strings on all kinds of actions we take, discretionary actions. We say in opportunity zones, you have to meet certain wage goals. We say in grant agreements, you have to meet city policies. I can go chapter and verse. The principal objection on this is that you have made an argument that the zoning code is not where we should address this, that it may be an otherwise laudable goal. I'm not sure when and how we're going to address this if we don't at least seize this moment to say, okay, let's keep it on the front burner, because I think what we're talking about is justice for janitors. Let's be very clear here. We're talking about a discretionary act of the city in which we're saying as some kind of condition, we don't want you degrading area wages and exploiting people. Now, we already do that in all kinds of ways. We recently adopted a statement of principle on a community benefits agreement. We say on all of our affordable housing, you have to meet a prevailing wage. I agree with you. It may be that the zoning code as an instrument is not ideal, and there may be particular reasons why it couldn't be, it would be difficult to enforce. But along with Commissioner Fritz, I see this as an opportunity to frame the issue and ask you not just to come back and tell us why this doesn't work, but to give us options for something like that's a first cousin that gives us some leverage through this discretionary act to maintain area standards in the service sector. And again, you may come back and say, we've looked at it, and we still can't find an answer. But all we're doing now is saying we want to continue the discussion in January, and so I will second the proposal.
So it's moved by Commissioner Fritz and seconded by Commissioner Fish. All right.
This would be for commercial buildings only? Is that right?
You all should tell us that, but this, was the proposal just for commercial buildings?
Yes, it's just for commercial.
Yeah, and just to put it in the frame, we're glad to bring it back. We're glad to bring this back, and it will be but what I'm sure we'll recommend is a policy statement of some sort about where the city is in a contractual or a development agreement.
Can I make a suggestion, Joe?
That we do that.
Because we have found your office to be incredibly creative, even where you disagree with the premise of a question. I would just say a follow-up meeting with Commissioner Fritz's office and my office to do some brainstorming. And still, you may at the end of this come back and still say we're barking up the wrong tree, but we want to have that conversation.
That's my intent too. So certainly don't go home tonight and start working away at it.
So, Mayor, so we don't actually have an amendment on the table at this point, so we would have to come back with an amendment sometime in the future. We could either come back on January 3rd, we have that date penciled in as a possible date, or we could bring it back on January 18th, and you could consider it before the...
You meet with Commissioners Fish and Fritz, and between the two of them, they can make a recommendation to council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But I believe we have to announce the next meeting at this meeting, isn't that right,
I
Lauren?
would say, let's tentatively say it'll come back on January 3rd, because I think we want to keep this on track.
Yep.
And that can always change, but you need a placeholder.
Or can't we just take the language that was proposed to the Planning Commission and advance that?
This has never actually been in the, there has been no language that the Planning Commission did not recommend for this
I think it actually gives us
I thought they had
more...
an amendment they rejected, though, or something.
No, they discussed the issue. It's similar to the discussion we're having now, Commissioner.
Are there other items that would be heard on January 3rd?
No,
we don't
this would
have
be it.
anything else on the list for January 3rd at this time.
And if we put it then, because I agree, Commissioner, we want to kind of keep working on it. And did you have a suggestion, City Attorney?
I think you're headed in the direction that you are coming back for the amendments package on January 18th.
For a hearing.
So you could bring language at that meeting. You can introduce it then. so that you don't have to have a
Would you prefer
separate
that?
hearing.
I would. I think, given the holidays and everything, I think the 3rd is a bit
Mayor, is that
optimistic.
acceptable?
That's acceptable.
18th?
Thank you.
Let's plan on that. So Sally, why don't you tell us where we are and what the schedule is going to be going forward?
Great, okay. So on this, excuse me? Yes, first of all, we have to go back to the parking item. When Mauricio was up here, you asked
very
for an
good.
amendment to the parking item.
Yeah. So just to clarify, Commissioner Fritz's amendment was to add, but no, no building area above it. I recommend that you change it to no gross building area above it.
Yeah.
And that's as standard Scrivener, so it's consistent. And then as far as the SEIU thing, I just want to clarify, it sounded like there was a motion and a second, but that was just for the concept.
It's
So there's
withdrawn.
not an actual amendment.
Yeah,
I
it's
just want to be
withdrawn.
clear on the record. Yeah.
That was clarified subsequently, that
Yep.
there was no formal amendment on the table, so it's withdrawn.
And that we might bring something on the
Right.
18th.
Great.
So
And
Lauren,
I'm
do we,
hearing no objection to the Scrivener area on the parking issue.
okay, so we don't need to move and second that again then?
That is
Okay.
actually what I said in the first
Oh,
place.
I heard building, I apologize.
Great, okay. So the PowerPoint slide that we have up shows January 3rd at 2 PM. We do not need that meeting, we've just decided, so we are not going to have
Yes, I
that.
don't love you, but I think you're probably quite relieved to have
And
a bit of time off.
so the next, we will be
Well, hold that
publishing.
date. It's going to be eaten up by 5 today, so hold that date. I put first dibs on it. Thank you.
So on January 5th, we will publish the amendments report based on the feedback we've gotten from you at these last 3 meetings and the items that you brought forward prior to beginning the hearings. And then we'll have our hearing on January 18th, and we'll take it from there.
Very good. That concludes the Central City 2035 discussion for today. We're going to continue the conversation on January 18th at 2 PM, time certain. Next item, 1311. Not at all.
Establish annual sale price cap of $375,000 for the Homebuyer Opportunity Limited Tax Exemption Program.
Colleagues, the Homebuyer Opportunity Limited Tax Exemption, otherwise known as HOLTE program, includes a 10-year exemption to low to moderate income homebuyers purchasing new construction homes, making homeownership more affordable for families in Portland. The Portland Housing Bureau is required to establish an annual sales price cap for the HOLTE program by January 1st, 2018, which may be up to 120% of the Portland median sales price for the 2017 calendar year. So that's January 1st, 2017 through November 30th, 2017. The Portland 2017 median sales price as provided by the Multnomah County Tax Assessor's Office is $375,000. The eligible income of HOLTE homebuyers must be below 100% of AMI $74,700 for a family of 4 currently. To maintain the affordability of the HOLTE units for low and moderate income homebuyers, the Portland Housing Bureau is proposing to set the 2018 HOLTE sales price cap at $375,000. That represents a 7% increase from the current 2017 sales price cap of $350,000. This is an annual administrative action for the implementation of the HOLTE program that requires council review and approval. Today we have Portland Housing Bureau Program Manager Andrea Mathiasen here to discuss this further and answer any questions that you may have. Come on up. And Kurt, are you coming up too, or? Not yet. Okay, very good. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. Andrea Mathiasen, Portland Housing Bureau. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, for that very thorough introduction of this item. I think the only thing that I would add, in addition to just reinforcing that this is an annual administrative step required for the program by state statute, is that the current sales price cap for the program is $350,000 for the 2017 calendar year, And we've reviewed the actual sales prices of the homes that sold within this calendar year. And although the sales price cap is set at $350,000, the average sales price in actuality has been about $315,000. So we do set this cap. 315,000, yes. We do set this cap annually at about 100% of median county sales price. We have generally not gone up to that maximum allowed 120%, but we don't typically tend to see the actual sales prices being maximized at that amount. So I did want to share that information with you and ask if you had any questions.
Very good. Are we ready for public testimony? One moment.
Carla has just recused herself.
Reminds me, I meant to bring
Probably
you my
not. You know,
book
we
of
have done
jokes.
this on consent in years past, so it may be that saying no, maybe yes.
Any public testimony,
I
Carla?
have one person, Jennifer James.
Is Jennifer here?
I'm here, but I'm sorry, I didn't want to testify on that. I just thought I had to sign up to come in.
Oh, yeah, yeah, in the future, you don't need to sign up to come in. No worries. Yeah, not a problem.
The resolution?
This is a resolution. Please call the roll.
Fish.
Thank you, Andrea, for your your typically crisp and to the point presentation, and you do a superb job at the Housing Bureau. It's a pleasure to have you appear before the council. Aye.
Saltzman.
Thank you. Aye.
Wheeler.
Thank you. Aye. Resolution is adopted. Item 1312, and my understanding is Commissioner Fritz will be back in time for the vote on this.
1312, approve Portland Housing Bureau to participate in the Home Purchase Assistance Program, a Freddie Mac pilot mortgage loan product that provides down payment and closing cost assistance to low and moderate income home buyers through approved participating mortgage lenders.
Very good, colleagues. One of the biggest obstacles to home ownership is savings to cover the down payment and closing costs. We've heard a lot about this of late. The Home Purchase Assistance Program is a new program proposed by the Portland Housing Bureau to help families cover these upfront costs. The Home Purchase Assistance Programs provides low and moderate income homeowners, home buyers in the city of Portland up to 8% of the mortgage amount for a down payment and closing costs associated with the housing purchase. This program is being piloted by Freddie Mac. This is the government purchaser of mortgage loans. And Portland has been selected by Freddie Mac as one of the only 5 governmental jurisdictions to participate in the initial rollout of this program. Assistance provided by Home Purchase Assistance Program is provided by first mortgage lenders in exchange for charging a slightly higher interest rate on the mortgage and does not require city funds to implement the program. The Home Purchase Assistance Program is targeted to families who can afford the mortgage loan necessary to own in the city of Portland, but exceed income limits of programs that can provide assistance with down payments or closing costs. Today we have Portland Housing Bureau Program Manager Andrea Mathiasen still here, and HPAP Program Coordinator Ira Bailey available to discuss this further and answer any questions. I see Director Krieger is here as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Welcome
Mayor.
back and welcome.
Kurt Krieger, Housing Director. Ira, I know, is on his way. You've gone so quickly through your agenda that I suspect that he was tracking time and thought he had a
That's
little
all
bit
right.
more.
We still need you to stall because I can't take the vote until Commissioner Fritz returns.
Wonderful. Well, just to frame the issue, when I came to Portland, we had an excellent history of homebuyer assistance, down payment assistance within the urban renewal areas. And we were pretty well capitalized within the interstate corridor urban renewal area, but we really had nothing available for someone living outside of an urban renewal area. And as you well know, a state statute limits the city to some 15% of the land area to be designated an urban renewal area. So we were missing out on a huge swath of the population. And knowing that we couldn't really justify using ongoing general fund revenue for down payment assistance citywide, we decided to tap the hydraulics of the private sector to recognize that long-term lending presents an opportunity if people are willing to accept a slightly more debt over the life of the loan. We can essentially generate for themselves down payment and closing costs. So I think it's an elegant solution to a long-standing problem. We're honored that Freddie Mac has the confidence in Portland. This has taken a few months to put together, but Andrea and Ira have run this through the community-based review process, and we're very excited about this. So I'll let Andrea take it from there.
Thank you, Kurt. Again, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, Andrea Mathiasen, Portland Housing Bureau. We could dive into the technical mortgage lending requirements of the program, but we are not going to do that today. Instead, I did just want to provide a very high-level example of what the program can offer. So for a household that is looking to secure a mortgage of about $300,000, this program could provide them with cash for closing costs and prepaid mortgage insurance to the tune of about $18,000. And so that is very helpful to these households, particularly because their ability to prepay that mortgage insurance lowers their monthly costs in a significant way. The amount of cash, that $18,000 that the first mortgage lenders are providing, is placed as a lien on the property for 10 years. There's no interest rates, there's no payments, and it is forgiven if the property owner remains in the home for 10 years. The income limits for this program are being proposed at 140% of area median income. It's about $104,000 annually. Those are consistent with some of the other low and moderate income homeownership programs administered by the Housing Bureau. We attempted to structure this in a way that would work with other programs that we're currently offering. The Mortgage Credit Certificate program, for example, this program works nicely with that so that homeowners can leverage all of the available homeownership assistance in order to overcome kind of the challenges that exist in the homeownership market currently. This program does also require education, first-time homeownership counseling, so that homebuyers are aware of what this product requires of them. It requires lenders to also provide them an analysis of what that increased mortgage interest rate means over the 30-year life of the loan if they were to stay in the home for the full 30 years. I think one other additional thing that I did want to clarify is that we anticipate, based on information from the mortgage lenders that we will be piloting this program with, is an estimated 100 to 200 home buyers may utilize this program annually. And of course, that's just a projection. It's not something that's been available previously. And I just wanted to ask if you had any other questions about the program as it's currently proposed.
On what basis was Portland selected?
I think that that's a good question. I would defer to Director Krieger. I believe that he held some relationships with Freddie Mac and under some of his previous employment that allowed Portland to enter into conversations about piloting this program.
Great. Director Krieger?
Yeah. I'd like to say that this is probably the power of networking. Indeed, Freddie Mac is based in McLean, Virginia, which is Fairfax, where I last came from. Their director of single family has a long history with a longtime associate of mine who's in the audience, Jim Stretz, used to be the director of the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority. She was his director. And when she went to Freddie Mac, they continued a very strong working relationship. And Jim approached me after I had become bureau director with the concept. I did meet with Freddie Mac a couple of times in Washington, D.C. as I discharged my duties as a board member of a nonprofit called NALFA, the National Association of Local Housing Finance Agencies. So it's been maturing for about the last year, and we're pleased that they have the confidence in our market. They wanted to make sure they had a West Coast market partner.
Great. Thank you for reeling this in for us. We appreciate it very much. Is there public testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
Please call the roll.
Fritz.
Thank you for explaining it to me ahead of time. Aye.
Fish.
It's an incredibly innovative program which addresses the barriers that some people face to home ownership. So hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate through this pilot that it works here in Portland as well and build on it. So thank you both. Congratulations. Aye.
Saltzman.
Yeah, it sounds very exciting, so good work. Aye.
Wheeler.
Excellent. Again, Director Krieger, thank you for your significant efforts on this. You have my gratitude. And Andrea, thank you. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item, 1313.
Authorize acquisition, construction, and permanent funding not to exceed $21,700,000 using North Macadam Urban Renewal Area funds to acquire certain real property located at 2095 Southwest River Parkway for the development of a 203-unit affordable rental housing project, and authorize a 99-year ground lease to River Place 3 Housing Limited Partnership or another Bridge Housing Corporation affiliate.
Colleagues, the River Place Parcel Number 3 development is another example of the great partnership between our office, the Housing Bureau, the Joint Office for Homelessness and Prosper Portland. This project will be a 13-story, entirely affordable building with 203 multifamily residential units. Our commitment to develop deeply affordable units continues with this project. It'll include 90 units that will serve households at or below 30% MFI. 20 of the units will be for permanent supportive housing. 10 units are vouchered units specifically set aside for veterans. Portland Housing Bureau's Investment Committee approved the project based upon new criteria after requesting that the Bureau adjust the proposed terms. We have a couple of amendments, one to update the Portland Housing Bureau approval in Section 1, Finding 15, and include the correct Exhibit A, and another from Commissioner Fish around Finding 7 language regarding funding for permanent supportive housing units, and you should have that language in front of you. To tell us more about this development opportunity, we have the Housing Bureau's Kurt Krieger. Director Krieger.
Yes, thank you very much, and I'll be joined by Cynthia Parker, the President and CEO of Bridge Housing. And I think it would be fine if she came up as I introduce the subject matter. We have a PowerPoint presentation spooled up for you. Thank you, Carla.
Thank
Wonderful.
you, Mayor Wheeler.
Good afternoon.
So
Hi.
we have two presentations. One sort of a backgrounder, since we have two members of council that may not have been on council when the North Macadam Urban Renewal Area was last recalibrated, and then the specifics about River Place Parcel 3. I provide a bit of history here. The River Place Parcel 3 came to council last in, the URA came to the council last in 2015, and there was a careful discernment by the city council to evaluate the URA and to ensure that family-sized housing was part of the development program going forward. Up to that point, only the Grays Landing project undertaken by REACH with PHB support had been constructed. The council passed a resolution which stipulated several things which needed to happen. The affordable housing set-aside was increased from the longstanding 30% to 42% for the life of the district. The rights for the development of a site within the North Macadam Urban Renewal Area was identified, and Prosper Portland and PHB were directed to work together on the procurement of a developer for that site. This map shows you generally it shows you the entire boundaries, including the merged adjacent education URA. And when we undertook this project, it was a Prosper Portland-owned site, so they led the procurement effort, but PHB was joined at the hip to make sure that we had at least 200 units of affordable housing, with at least 62 of which were going to be affordable to people with incomes from 0 to 30% of AMI. And it's worth mentioning that Commissioner Fish was very directly involved in the negotiation for that deep investment in affordable housing.
Kurt, can I just add one piece of history? Because I wish we did a historical slide on every project, because we forget our history, and then the council turns over and history begins with the closing documents. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge two events which predated 2015 that are critically important. One was the demise of the Education Urban Renewal District and its replacement with an expanded urban renewal district in South Waterfront. And I won't go through all the details, but that was a very contested discussion, lots of moving pieces. The demise of a freestanding education URA created an opportunity to expand the existing boundaries. But I want to pay particular tribute to a former commissioner and a former nonprofit leader who in either 2014 or 2015, Commissioner Fritz, my memory's a little cloudy, but it's one of those two, either late 14 or 15, Gretchen Kafori, the founder, the commissioner who actually founded the Housing Bureau and was literally the mother of the CDC movement here, with Susan Emmons, who was one of our most respected advocates, came to council and through a, let me put it this way, raised their voices loudly at this council and said that the council, and it wasn't directed at any member of this council, it was the council generically, had not, in their view, met its promise to the community around South Waterfront. This predated you, Kurt, predated the mayor. This was but there were some other people at the table who had been involved for years around this. And I don't remember, Commissioner Fritz, a hearing in which there was more heat generated from activists. Even today, where we're used to lots of heat from activists, when Gretchen Kafori raised her voice, it got everyone's attention. And what she did is she challenged the council to not only honor its commitment, but double down. And as a result of that, and partnerships and conversations and a lot of work, we got the second site and additional resources, the bump in the set-aside. And Dan Saltzman and a whole lot of other people deserve some credit who were part of those discussions. But I want to just acknowledge Gretchen Kafori, who's no longer with us, because she came in and was a singular voice in getting our attention. And it did set in motion a number of things. And I think it's fair to say we would not be here today had she and Susan Emmons not come in and educated the council about where they felt we were lacking. And so I honor both of their work in this regard.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that background. So the next slide talks a little bit about the contours of the procurement itself. April 9th of 2015, RFP was put out on the street with a minimum expectation of 200 affordable units between 0 and 60% of AMI, and at least 90 of those affordable to people between 0 and 30% of MFI. And as you witnessed in many of our other projects, that's a particularly deep dive. It's a very deep investment in equity. Bridge was in heavy competition with two other very worthy contenders, but they ultimately prevailed. And they prevailed with an initial plan of 365 units. It's been modified slightly. Cynthia will discuss some of the permutations they've gone through. They had a particular interest in an anchor grocery of 30,000 square feet. Also, they spent a lot of time working with about 20 different grocers to try to secure that, but Prosper was not in a position to provide financial assistance since they were investing in 4th and Harrison. So that ground floor retail has been right-sized to the available resources. Parking is provided, and 203 affordable units from 0 to 60 proposed. Of those, 90 units, as specified, would be from 0 to 30, and they break out into 3 categories. There are 70 housing choice vouchers provided by Home Forward, 10 Veterans Affairs supportive housing vouchers, and then 10 units are made affordable through the net operating income of the overall project. So 90 units in total. And under Commissioner Saltzman, $19 million was set aside to undertake our portion of this project. With all that, the Bridge Housing proceeded with the option to purchase with Prosper and design the project. They got notice to authorization to proceed in April of 2016. On November 9th of 2016, we had a gaping hole in the budget because the value of tax credits was diminished by the promise of lower corporate income taxes. So we worked throughout the winter and spring of last year to fill that hole, and Bridge, through their resourcefulness, which is exactly why we selected them, was able to commandeer other resources to enhance the capital stack. We then authorized them to go into full construction drawings and in August, which they did do. We have been, as you know, in a very tight labor market, and materials and labor have both been going up about 1% a month. So when they initiated final design development and construction specifications in August, it took about 5 months for all that to be wrapped up, and we experienced 1% a month inflation over 5 months, which was a $4.7 million gap. So Cynthia came back to the Housing Bureau with her partner, Williams and Dame Development, to try to partner in that resolution of this problem. They were willing to cover about half of it, but they needed some assistance. So the Housing Bureau showed a willingness to provide $2.7 million of additional revenues available at the conversion of the loan to a permanent loan, but we also needed additional public value. You had previously approved your permanent supportive housing resolution. We asked for at least 20 units of the vouchered units to be provided with services to be fully robust permanent supportive housing units. We also felt that it was necessary to secure the public interest in the land. And as I've explained to some of you in preparation for this hearing, we initially looked at ownership of the land under the West Tower, the affordable tower. And I took that proposal to the Housing Investment Committee, and they had a split vote on the issue. So we continued to work the issue between November 28th and December 1st, last Friday. And since then, Bridge has consented to buy the land from Prosper at a discounted price, to sell it at the same discounted price for $2.7 million, essentially. And we will then lease back the property to them to undertake the project. Prosper procured one project with 2 towers, and it's important to recognize the Prosper Board's intent in that regard. So we have negotiated a provision that says that they will undertake the second building, what's so-called East Building, no later than December 31st of 2020, or the Housing Bureau can replace Bridge with a replacement developer. We have every reason to believe that they will perform. It's to their best economic interest to do so, but we also want to make sure that the entire property gets built. So before you today are approval of 2 loans, one for $19 million of North Macadam tax increment, and one for the $2.7 million over and above the baseline of 19. So it's $21.7 million. We're also asking your approval for the execution of a purchase and sales agreement in substantially the form provided with the replacement Exhibit A, which the mayor explained, which would be and a ground lease between PHB and River Place 3 Housing Limited Partnership, the ultimate borrower. I would say that the appraisal for the underlying tower has been performed, and we're essentially getting a piece of land valued at $4.7 million for $2.7 million, and we are in turn then leasing it to Bridge for 99 years to ensure permanent affordability. So I assert that the public value in this project is very strong, and it actually got stronger as we negotiated longer. And this is a project that does need to close by the end of this year because tax credits will be valued lower next year with the lower corporate tax rates. So with that, I do want to recognize that Saban Beto from the Housing Bureau, the underwriter, has worked through the Thanksgiving holiday on this project, the entire holiday, including weekends. And Javier Mina and the Housing Finance Manager, Carl Dinkelspiel, have been very deeply involved with this project all along. So without them, it would not have gotten to this state of readiness. Cynthia?
Great, thank you, Director Krieger and Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners. I'm Cynthia Parker, and I'm the President and CEO of Bridge Housing. And with me is Nicole Peterson, who is a Vice President and Director of Bridge Housing in Portland. So we're going to talk briefly about the project, but I also wanted to just comment on Commissioner Fish's recollection and tribute to the two women who had spoken up so early on about housing here in Portland. Gretchen was a friend of mine back in the 70s, and I knew her well. I think it's fitting that we're here today to continue to move on with this doubling down and hopefully build this housing, which is so desperately needed in this town. So having said that, I'm going to just briefly run you through this project and talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we've had. Frankly, we're very challenged in the housing world right now because of, as stated by Director Krieger, some of the proposed changes with the Tax Reform Act. The House version promises to eliminate the volume cap bond program, which is paired with the 4% tax credits. That particular, if that version of the bill does pass by Christmas as promised, then we will have all of the tax-exempt bonds issued under volume cap in the variety of states go away, and the tax-exempt status will be terminated on 12/31 of this year. So thanks to the Bureau for their speedy help in trying to move this along, and we certainly appreciate the staff's working through the holiday and helping us get this moving.
And by the way, in plain English, with the change in the corporate tax rate, if the pricing of a tax credit drops to 80 cents on the dollar or something like that, we would not have been able to do Gray's Landing or a number of projects with tax credits that diminished. And that's what Kurt alluded to. And those two changes at a time when we're getting so little support from the federal government, it's really a 1-2 punch.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's it really threatens to reshape the small amount of housing that we're able to create in this country with this tool right now. So we're working very hard with a number of people, including our friends at the Bureau, to try to issue any lobbying or entries to our congressional members. So please get your telephones out and let people know that this is going to be a real problem. So with that, let's just move on to this particular project, and I'm going to call upon Nicole also to help me with this. But basically, you see in front of you the project itself, which as proposed is a phased development. The first tower, which is 203 units, is 100% affordable, and it is currently envisioned that the second building, which is a wood frame, 177 units of housing, would be phased and would also be affordable, and that's what we plan on doing. The project team is Hoffman Construction. We have Dan Dinkreth. Sorry, Dan. I was thinking of his grandfather. Here today to talk a little bit about construction costs, which have certainly gone quite crazy here in Portland over the last few months. And then we also have Anchor Moisen Architects. I'm sure you know them. They're the architects of the Sitka and Ramona here in Portland. And then our advisors have been Dame Williams, Dyke Dane in particular. He's been working with us for a number of years. As said, the project itself was awarded to Bridge in 2015, back in July, and we have worked quite diligently and expended a great deal of money to move it through the variety of processes that are in front of us. Both sites, both projects are moving along at exactly the same level, so they are both permitted and shovel-ready. But the financing for the 100% affordable building that's located in the tower is the one that has a plan of finance completed. So there's still work to do on the second phase. The 203 units in the project do consist of 90 units that are below 30% of AMI. 70 are supported by project-based vouchers that are provided by Home Forward. 10 are Veterans VASH voucher units. And then again, as mentioned earlier, 20 are permanent supportive housing. And then 111 units are at 60% of area median income, 2 managers' units. I'd note that Bridge is very involved with supportive housing. We have developed over 12,000 units of housing. We have 2,000 in our pipeline under construction right now. But of those units that we've developed, 1,040 are permanent supportive housing. So we have a deep commitment to that type of housing. We know what it takes to provide the services, and really to be successful, those two can't go without the other, really, to make them effective. I would also add that we have about 1,020 supportive units in our pipeline right now, so we intend to complete those in the next couple of years. The tower itself is about an $86 million project, and of that, the construction costs are about $54.7 million. Those are the hard costs of construction. It roughly equals about $250,000 a unit, of which $100,000 would be supportive by funding from the Bureau and the City of Portland. So one of the reasons you see such a high price tag is that Portland is beginning to become quite a high-cost area, and you all know that you're rapidly moving up against Seattle in rental prices. I was just comparing some of those from the Seattle market, where I have a home and just came down from this morning. One of the techniques that we've used to inject more tax credits into the building itself was to use the IRS allowance of developer fee to increase the developer fee to $8 million, of which $5 million will go back into the project. So it just is an artifice in order to get tax credit investment dollars back into the building and not use public resources from the city's coffers. Impact Capital, who is our partner, they partnered with us on the Abigail, and in a project out in Hillsborough, will be the resident services provider. They are a provider of veteran services, and some of their programs will include financial literacy and management, homework clubs, parenting, education, health and wellness, and then again, services that are helping to coordinate the VASH vouchers and the veterans who will be living in the building. So of the city's funding, about $19 million will come from the North Macadam URA, $2.7 million from the North Macadam URA as well. So that was the second 2.7 that Kurt mentioned. And then there's a waiver of $3.3 million in system development charges, which is very much appreciated on our part. So both of the PHB loans will close simultaneously, as will the debt financing. And as said, we are using we will purchase the land using bridge funding, then move that back immediately into the City of Portland's hands, and you will lease it back to us for 99 years. So that's essentially how that deal will work. I really don't have much else to say. I think that this has had a long and challenging road. First, with at the beginning of the year, with the following the election and the promise of tax reform that did impact pricing, as Commissioner Fish mentioned, and then of course now, as we're moving ahead and looking at this additional threat of completely eliminating the program, we know that we all have to move quickly if we want to save this housing. So thank you.
I just have a couple of final comments. We talked a little bit about Block 45 last week, and there are some differences between the two. Block 45 on Grand at Holiday is in a qualified census tract, so that actually gets a basis boost. The tax credits are actually worth more in that location. So in this instance, the leverage ratio is 3 to 1. We're leveraging $3 of outside private financing for every $1 of public finance. And those partners include National Equity Fund in for $28 million, Key Bank and Oregon Housing and Community Services, some $17 million. This was the first and only project in the City of Portland to use Department of Justice settlement money from the Credit Suisse lawsuit, because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had purchased some mortgages that were bundled by Credit Suisse, and they were found to be defective. So we benefited here in Portland from that. Bridge, as mentioned by Cynthia, is putting their own cash in the deal, and there's also a $40 million permanent loan on the project from Barron's Multifamily Capital. So it's important to recognize that we're leveraging a significant amount of outside resources. The project not only will meet the long-term permanent affordability expectations of the city, but they'll be contracting with a minimum of 20% women, minority, small businesses, and it will be a LEED Gold sustainable project. That concludes my comments.
Very good. Before we, well, let's see. We need to put the amendments on the table, but how many people do we have signed up to testify?
I show 2.
Why don't we do that, and then we'll put the amendments on the table.
Let's put them on first so they can testify to them.
All right, that's
But
fine.
But by the way, just one question, Kurt, because I think it's important for people. You kept talking about leverage. So as my understanding is the public investment per door, if you will, is about $100,000, and the rest is private equity and other sources. So when we're talking about the public's return on the investment, we're about $100,000 a door, and the rest comes from people willing to make investments in this through tax credits and other sources to get and loans for the difference.
Absolutely correct.
So that's a pretty attractive ratio in terms of leverage.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Colleagues, I move the mayoral amendment to update the Portland Housing Bureau approval in Section 1, Finding 15, and to include the correct Exhibit A.
Second.
I have a motion. Commissioner Fish seconds. Commissioner Fish has an amendment.
Mayor, I have an amendment which we've cleared with your office, which would amend the ordinance Section 1, Finding 7, by striking and replacing the second sentence as follows. Of the vouchered units, 20 will be for permanent supportive housing units. Strike, if no service funding is available for the permanent supportive housing units, then the requirement for said units is terminated, and replaced with the following. The city, county, and our partners will prioritize finding the funding and services for these units in order to remain consistent with the stated goals outlined in Resolution 37323.
Very good. We have a second from Commissioner Fritz. Colleagues, any other amendments to put on the table at this time? We'll go ahead and leave those amendments open. We'll take public testimony and then vote. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Tim Davis and Shannon Milligan.
Come on up, 3 minutes, name for the record. We don't need your address. If you're a lobbyist, let us know. Thanks. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hello, my name is Shannon Milligan. I'm a resident of the Abigail. It's an affordable building in the North Pearl District. It's built by Bridge Housing. I am a single mom of 2 kids. I'm a small business owner, and I'm a Portland native. Before I tell you about how great it is living at the Abigail, I'll tell you a bit about how it's changed my lives before I tell you how great it is to live at the Abigail, I'm going to tell you a little bit of background history leading to our residence and our at the Abigail and Bridge Housing. 7 to 8 years ago, not once but twice, my children and I were displaced from our home. As the Portland housing market began to change, 2 go-arounds of packing up our things with a month's notice, and ironically, both times we moved all of our things into the same exact storage unit. We were unable to secure a place to call home in the time allotted. It was a complete nightmare. We couch surfed. We stayed with friends and relatives in both Vancouver and Beaverton while we commuted into the city to look for rentals daily and to go to work. I don't know if you've ever lived with your daily items stored in the trunk of your car, but it isn't easy. And like I said, we did that twice. I wasn't willing to change schools for my kids. In addition to the other changes that we were facing, my kids, they were stressed. My son was struggling in school. It was all out of their control, and it was out of my control as well. Each time we looked for housing, the prices climbed higher and out of our budget. The inner city where we lived, it had very little amount of family-size rentals. We couldn't compete with other rental candidates that showed up at the open houses. They presented dual incomes, they appeared more stable, and so time and time again, we were struck out. So we finally landed a new rental. It was well beyond our budget. It was substandard in many ways, but we stayed there for 5 years. During this time, I told others that I experienced renter's PTSD. I would worry about my lease and around renewal time. I'd worry that my landlord would raise my rent higher, impacting my already impossible budget, and he did. Would he want to sell it? Would he have us move it, or would we move again? Should I even be asking for necessary repairs, thinking in turn that he's going to think that I'm costly or that I'm a nuisance tenant, and again raise the rent? And if we were to move again, the market prices are even higher. Where would we go? Although we had a place to live, I was very anxious with the constant what ifs and juggling my finances. I began to research affordable housing in Portland, and I read of plans for the Abigail. It wasn't far from our home. I watched it being built, and I dreamed of living there. I kept an eye on Bridge Housing's website, and on day one of the open application period, I went in and I turned in an application. And in August of 2016, my 2 children and I moved to the Abigail. We moved into stability, where I took a deep breath and I was able to shut down all the what ifs that were bouncing around in my head in all those years of unstable living. Our building is diverse. We have varying income levels, ages, races, and backgrounds. It's a community. My family, along with many others of my neighbors, were flourishing, and we don't have the worry of how to simply live. It's safe, it's energy efficient. Like the presentation showed, we have support services from Impact Northwest with financial classes and events that bring all of the neighbors together. And I feel more connected in this building than I did anywhere that I've lived in years. It's near where I work. I can focus on growing my business. My kids can focus on school without distraction of thinking we may move. And I can be of support to them through college. And I can once again return to contributing to my own retirement funds. Living in affordable housing has changed my family's life for the better. I desire you all to take this into consideration when planning for the future of affordable housing here in Portland and with this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent
Thank you so much for taking the time to come and tell us your story. I'm glad it worked out for you.
There was one other gentleman, is that correct?
Yes, Tim Davis.
Is Mr. Davis here? Mr. Davis has left. Very good. Please call the roll on Amendment 1, which was the first one that I put on the table pertaining to the Section 1, Finding 15.
And Exhibit A, was it all?
And Exhibit A. It's part of the same amendment, swapping out Exhibit A.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The amendment is adopted. Commissioner Fish's amendment, please.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The amendment is adopted. Any further questions before we move on to the main motion? To the main motion, please call the roll.
Fritz.
I imagine there's lots of people in Portland who are absolutely terrified not knowing what's happening or knowing what's happening with the federal tax code changing. And this is a bright light in the midst of all that darkness that people did work all the way through the Thanksgiving weekend and up till this very minute. And we're absolutely determined to get this done by the end of the year. So thank you, Director Krieger. Thank you to Bridge Meadows. Thanks to everybody who was involved in it. And thank you for coming to tell us, Shannon, of the really why we're doing this. You put the face on it, so thank you. I'm proud to live in a city and be serving on city council where people try to do the right thing and can do so very quickly when the needs arise. And I have to say that I'm sure that Gretchen Kafori is here today. So I love you, Gretchen. Aye.
Saltzman. Fish, sorry.
I'm sorry?
Fish.
Okay. Saltzman Fish. I thought it was a new
It's a new one.
combination.
It's a new one. That's a new one, yeah.
I could only wish. I'm open to being adopted. I want to echo what Amanda just said about Gretchen. She mentored both of us. And most of the times that she summoned me to her apartment was around where she thought I was falling short. And we miss her greatly, although her spirit lives on in her daughter, the county chair. And I also want to acknowledge Susan Emmons. I can't think of someone who had a bigger impact on affordable housing. And once upon a time, she actually shaped the editorial policy of the Oregonian around focusing on the needs of the very low income. So I honor both of them. Dan, you launched this process as the housing commissioner, and Kurt and the PHB team really brought it forward, so congratulations to you. And Mayor, a lot of good ideas come to council, but unless there's a closer, they don't get done. And by my count, in the course of a week, you have closed 443 units of affordable housing in our community, which is probably a record. One is the largest housing development that we've ever done of its kind. And I'd have to go back over history and ask Kurt to help me, but when I look at the numbers here on 0 to 60 and 0 to 30, plus the PSHs in this apartment, in this project, I don't think there's anything comparable, other than something that Home Forward has done. So I congratulate you for meeting the needs of people really desperately shut out of the private markets and who desperately need our help. I met Bridge Housing many years ago when Dyke brought some folks over to introduce me, and they were, it was his vision to bring them into the River District, and I think they have fully met the trust which we placed in them with the Abigail, which both is a standout project, and the testimony today speaks to how successful it is beyond just the beauty of the building, but the services and the way it's run. This took a lot of creative financing, and we are up against a clock and a gun, so congratulations on that. It's part of the ethic of our housing community, which is there's no barrier we're not going to work through, but it took a lot of work. Mayor, I think the 20 PSH units and the commitment we've made is a hell of a down payment on the policy which you have helped lead, and we will work with you to find that funding with the county and our partners, because it's a shared obligation. I have the same sense of pride that Commissioner Fritz does, that we live in a community that can achieve something like this, and today I'm proud to cast my vote as an aye.
Saltzman?
Well, thank you, everybody that pulled together to keep this project alive. And it's a mind-boggling, to those of you who don't speak the language, or to those of us who don't speak the language of housing, it's really mind-boggling to see all these numbers tossed around, all these different sources of funding that somehow magically come together. And I'm sure it's not magic, it's a lot of hard work. And so I just want to thank the Housing Bureau, Kurt Krieger, Cynthia Parker, and Bridge Housing, Prosper Portland, Mayor's Office, everybody that really kept this project alive, because it will produce a lot less PTSD on people like Shannon, who are going to be living in this new development. And I was struck, Commissioner Fritz, you inadvertently referred to Bridge Housing as Bridge Meadows, and it just made me think, gee, what a great marriage that would be, getting Bridge Meadows, which creates intergenerational communities for foster kids, married with Bridge Housing, which just has an outstanding track record. So that's going to be one of my goals in my final year here, maybe just to forge that relationship a little bit better.
Always got to help.
Yeah, thank you for that idea. But this is really, I'm very proud to have had some association with this project, and I'm pleased to vote aye.
Wheeler?
Well, I certainly see my role here is to continue the excellent leadership that started this project all those years ago. Commissioner Saltzman and Commissioner Fish reminded us, again, as appropriate to do, the history that brings us here and makes the approach to housing in our community unique. We are not Tokyo. We are not Montreal. And we are not Singapore. We are Portland. And we have our own issues, our own obstacles, our own desires, our own culture around development. But what we all agree is we need more workforce and affordable housing, and we need it yesterday. And Commissioner Fish has done a great job, or if I can call him Commissioner Saltzman Fish, I think that sounds nice, has done an excellent job of keeping permanent supportive housing front and center. And Director Krieger, I want to echo all of those who say you used a lot of creativity here. I'm still trying to figure out a lot of the lingo around housing. I do know a thing or two about bonding capacity and finance. And I think you've put together a capital stack here that is very innovative and thoughtful given the resources that we have. I think you're leveraging resources in a really responsible and creative way. And it's important to combine those two things when you're talking about finance. I also just want to put an admonition out there. Things change on January 1st. Things change with the passage of the Tax Act. And it will have implications for our ability to develop these kinds of projects. The cost will go up. and some of the tools that are currently available to us may not be available to us in the future. And that's just the reality under which we have to operate. And we'll continue to be responsible and creative in our approach. So thanks to everybody who worked on this. Thanks to folks, you guys who took your Thanksgiving weekend and took time away from your families and other opportunities to help make sure that we got this done. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted as amended. Thank you. One last item, and it's a fast one, folks. It's a second reading. Item number, for those of you wondering, 1314 we covered this morning, and that was noticed in advance, so that leaves us with 1315, please, Carla.
Authorize the Bureau of Transportation to acquire certain permanent and temporary rights necessary for construction of the St. John's Truck Strategy Phase 2 project through the exercise of the city's eminent domain authority.
Colleagues, this is an issue where we had a first reading recently. We had a presentation. We took extensive testimony on this item. This is a second reading. Is there any further discussion?
Yes,
Commissioner Fritz.
I believe what we did, Mayor, was to ask Transportation to talk with the property owner for Exhibit 25 to come up with a resolution to the concerns that were raised. So could I get an update on where we're at with that and whether we need to amend the ordinance to make it clear that we're actually, my understanding is we're not going to be exercising the purchase eminent domain.
Hi, Mayor, Commissioners, Marty Maloney, Peabody Right Away. So we did meet with Mrs. Hayes, and we did actually come up with an alternative design for, we were able to actually work the sidewalk away from her property, so no permanent rights will be acquired. We will, however, need temporary rights from her, just like it pretty much will be uniform with the rest of the properties. So we're not positive what we need quite yet on the temporary construction easement, but the area that we have, I would recommend not changing what we have. We can actually acquire less than what is needed with the dedication, but
well, the problem is, though, that it does say that we're going to take a permanent taking there, so I would not be comfortable even, I mean, obviously you've come to this agreement, but it means that what we would be voting on is not what's actually going to happen.
yeah, we could actually, if you would like, we can actually go back and change it just to show a temporary right. We've in the past, if we've needed any less rights, we could actually get the temporary construction instead of the dedication. If we had a temporary construction easement, we wouldn't actually be able to get a permanent right. But we can go back and actually just amend it if you would like. That's no problem.
I would feel more comfortable if that's okay with you as the Transportation Commissioner.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your patience staying here all day.
No problem. It was good to meet with her and come up with a positive resolution.
I heard she was very pleased with the responsiveness of the city and of you in particular, so thank you for that.
Okay, problem.
So procedurally, I want to make sure I understand what we're doing. Are we continuing this?
Yes.
If you're amending.
Okay.
Or should I move to change the easement from permanent to construction and move it over to next week?
If he brings a substitute next week, we can just adopt it with an emergency clause.
Yeah, that sounds the quickest way of doing it. Would that work
Okay,
for you?
so we can actually just switch out the exhibit just to show a temporary easement instead of the permanent. Okay, I think that would be easy.
Thank
Do
you
I
very
need
much.
a time certain?
No.
Very good. So this item, item 1315, is continued to next Wednesday?
Correct.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
So done. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
So, did you?
Hooray.